Hey,
Hello, Sue.
how are you? Very nice to finally meet you properly.
Thank you very much. That's a lovely looking farmhouse kind of kitchen you got behind you
I
there.
know, and everyone thinks it's fake, but it's actually my real kitchen.
Okay, no, it looks real to me. The light looks real.
Yeah, it'll probably be changing. Let's just keep our fingers crossed that we don't see the lightning coming through the window.
Oh, okay. Is the weather looking like it might turn bad there today?
Yeah, it's they're like everyone's sending warnings and everything, but I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that it'll happen a little bit later. It's really, really hot here. So we need rain. We need a thunder and lightning storm, but let's just leave it till later.
What part of France are you in? Are you in the north or the south?
So I'm in Burgundy. I'm about an hour and a half south of Paris.
Okay, brilliant. So that's why you're able to go to the city quite often.
That's why I'm constantly in Paris. Yeah.
Got
My
it.
two daughters live there. I have an apartment there. And yeah, but I prefer out here.
When was it you moved to France?
So I moved to France in the early 90s. So long,
Oh,
long, long time ago. I was brought over here by BBDO,
yeah.
um, which is, a giant ad agency, and I was their communications director. And there were four of us in total running the BBDO headquarters for Europe. So
Okay.
yeah, and I was just sort of their token woman, but
And you'd come over from New York, is that right?
I came over from New York. That's right.
Okay. And is that where you grew up and like sort of built your career in the beginning?
Yeah, so I started at Ogilvy Mather. That was
Hmm.
I began in Ogilvy Mather, and at in well, of course, everything those that's like ancient history in terms of the advertising world now, but at those days I wanted to do have an international career, and in those days I thought, oh my God, this is going to take me 30 years to like even be sent to London or something. So I I took a post at BBDO Worldwide, which was, kind of down the street, thinking that it would kind of fast track it. And I was right. It did fast track it. The minute I heard they were, forming BBDO Europe headquarters in Paris, I'm like, yes, I'm going there. And I used all my sort of powers of persuasion.
So when you came into the industry, you were very specifically in the world of advertising and direct advertising on television, newspaper, media, and print.
Yeah, mainly television and some print, basically. Yeah. So I was
And
doing the branding side of things, right? I was working for, people like AT&T, General Foods, just some really, really big companies. Um, and yeah, that's what it was like, big advertising, Super Bowl kind of advertising. And
and
it's actually served me really well. It's funny. It's sort of like I kind of think of that as kind of an analog world, but what was good about that is I did a lot of strategic planning. And so a lot of it was, there was a lot of discipline about um, people sort of poo-poo branding advertising, but there was a lot of rigorous discipline about what it was that you were trying to communicate, how you were trying to connect with audiences. And when I came to BBDO, I don't know if this is interesting for anyone, but when I came to BBDO in Paris, the challenge was they had basically bought all these creative agencies. So you had all these really creative people that were not team players at all. And we
mhm.
were like, okay, how can we get these people to work together? And so what we did was, as a communication director, we created these series of studies, which makes it sound really boring, but they were like these really sexy kind of documentaries about big audiences, men or women or youth or business people. And what we did is we got kind of like, we had each of the agencies do their research, and they brought it to me, and not only wrote the presentations, but I created like these documentary films that pieced all of it together, and they were huge hit. We earned we got a lot of business using these. They were called the future studies, and that was sort of my claim. That was my 15 minutes of fame. And then, but but what's interesting to me about it is it's not, those skills are still super, super important. When I do the work that I do now in terms of email marketing, the understanding, it's not just understanding where people are now, it's where people want to be. Because the future studies were more about, I remember I did one about women, and I was this is like pre all the stuff that's happened, and it was like, my thesis was that women were getting more and more confident. And everyone's like, no, that's not true. That's not true. And I had people crying. But actually that is exactly what happened. Right.
Yes,
And
I
then
think so.
in the men, it was the same thing, sort of kind of the more, because we started the future studies with Gillette, because they were like, I mean, they're like they're very, their audience is very much male. So, talking a little bit about, sort of the softer side of men, it was just really, really interesting. And I think people in the digital world, they think everything is a metric and everything, but there's a side of it that people miss, that what we're really needing to do is speak to people. It's almost in an unconscious way about their not just their aspirations, but their disappointments. And I feel like that's an element that sometimes people forget.
When you came
And
from that advertising world, there was a lot of people in that type of industry who were artistic people who'd come from even from an art school background rather than from a business background, right?
that's right. It's just so fun. Yes. Yes. So you had the kind of a mix, right? You'd have some
Hmm.
people who were super business oriented, and then you had people that were just really creative and really visual, or they were great with words. So it was a, that world doesn't exist anymore, by the way. That whole old, it's sort of the Mad Men, that's
Hmm.
over.
Yes.
It's over.
And it makes sense because now people have an idea. They go spend a couple of $1,000 on Facebook to test out some ads. And if they work, they make more. And if they don't, they can't. Whereas in the advertising industry that you came up in, you couldn't do that. So
Oh
people would,
no.
you would spend tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of dollars at them in one transaction, in one test. So you needed to do a lot more preparation before somebody says,
And
okay, I'll sign off on that.
strategic thinking. But then there were some people who did too much thinking. Like I worked on, I probably shouldn't say the name of the company, but I worked on a project with premium coffee,
Hmm.
and it was like they went on and on. They talked about it for years, and in the meantime, Starbucks just swooped in. It was all over, right? It was like the industry they wanted to make an impact on. And I think that happened with a lot of people eventually, as things sped up. And then what I saw also is a lot of people in those world didn't, I literally, most of them didn't make the transition into the internet, right? They have a, they didn't understand that it's not that it was I think some of the fundamentals and the universals are still there because it's human beings,
Hmm.
but they weren't able to apply what they knew from that analog world into the digital world, and they kind of were thrown off the carousel.
So
I
do
mean,
agents,
yeah,
oh, excuse me. No,
I still see that. I still see that from some of those people from that world there. They're very nostalgic about it, but they don't realize that this is also really exciting what's happening now, right?
do those types of agencies, the big agencies, do they still exist in the same way? Do they still serve the clients in the same way, or have they been to a large extent replaced?
They still exist, but I think the deliverables are really different, and of course the whole media world is much more fragmented, right? I think that's
Hmm.
that it's, I mean, we all have to deal with that, really. The
It's
fragmentation is something we're all like, oh, okay, what do we do now?
it,
Um,
it has seeped into every little corner of our lives now. Whereas it used to be you could switch off the TV and get away from it.
You know, yeah, well, it's sort of, I like living in France because it's sort of like yesteryear still here. Like people still, they still watch 20, which is, the 8 o'clock news. It's like you would never watch like the 6 o'clock news in America anymore. But here it's like still a little bit traditional, right?
So you feel that French people they haven't quite gotten there yet in terms of being totally soaked in media 24 hours a day, or
It's just, I don't know. I actually, Sunday was kind of, there's been a big uproar in France
Mhm.
because of the recent elections. And I just got my French nationality about a year ago, a little more than a year ago. The mayor called me up and said, do you want to like man the voting booths? I'm like, yeah, of course I do. Like I could finally vote. And but they were so cute. So I was with all the villagers and they're all talking the way they talk about Facebook. It's just very cute.
Okay.
It's not like I can't explain it. It's just a different approach to technology, shall we say.
Okay. Uh, for you personally, you said like when that kind of fragmentation of media happened and then everything started to move online, did you stay in the agency world or did you move on and start to work as an independent or freelancer or something else?
So I left, basically, it's kind of a long story, but BBDO Europe was sort of the brainchild of the guy who ran BBDO France, and he passed.
Mhm.
He was at 54. He's a very famous celebrity, really was in France, and he went out jogging one morning at his house in Corsica and died. And so basically, BBDO Europe left Paris and went to London. So I didn't want to go to London.
Mhm.
So I stayed in Paris and started my own agency, and I've been on my own since.
Oh, amazing. Okay. And did you start out in traditional media at that point, or did you move straight onto the internet?
It was sort of like, so that was like the end of the 90s.
Hmm.
So that was when things were starting to shift, right? So it was interesting, so that I did a lot of the sort of future study type work for, big companies. I started out with, Wrangler, I worked with Lego, I worked with L'Oreal, really, really big companies, and BBDO, actually, who they were a big client of mine. And we did a lot of that strategic, I did purely strategic work for many, many years. And then I started doing, I did a lot of film work for clients too, but always the big clients. And then as the internet started shifting, I shifted my audience to smaller entrepreneurs, smaller businesses, because it's just more, it's just much more fun.
When you work with those kinds of big brands, you're, I'm guessing there's quite tight boundaries on the things you can say and do, and there's always a lot of you have to look to what's come before you can say anything new. Is that right?
The biggest problem is that it's hard to change things. So I worked for a very famous ski company in France, and I traveled the world with it. So I went to them, and just this is a good example of the kind of work I did, and I still do, which is I came in and they were talking about their skis and the fiberglass and there was all like really minute features and details. And I'm like, you know what? Being skiing, I don't know if you're a skier, but skiing is like a really emotional, very 360-degree experience for people. I said, you're not talking about that. You're just talking about your fiberglass.
Nerd
So we went
stuff.
around, we went around the world. We went to the Alps, we went to the US, all the Rockies, Vale, we went to Japan, we went all over and talked to people about the experience on the mountain. And it was just such a really wonderful experience, and put together one of these presentations just like I had done for the future studies, with the documentary and the films and wonderful quotes. And great strategy. And everyone applauded. I got standing ovation. And then I came back 3 weeks later and they're still talking about the fiberglass.
Okay. I thought that
I
story was going to go one way and
think
it
and
went nowhere.
no, it went zero. So
Okay.
yeah, so I'm really not trying to like compliment myself because I didn't have any effect whatsoever. It's just to be really clear. And I think after that experience, that was, I think, kind of a tipping point for me. That's, I really want the strategy work that I do to actually have an effect.
Okay.
And so that's sort of, I think, when I started to shift to smaller companies. I mean, I still do work with bigger companies, but I prefer to work with a small because I feel like I can actually affect change, like the people that are running companies.
So
So
when you
yeah.
talk about strategic work, what you're talking about is this kind of work of like doing the really deep research of trying to understand the business and the products, not just in terms of, like we said, nerd stuff, but in terms of the experience of the buyer and the user and figuring out emotionally what the triggers are and how to communicate those.
Yeah, and it's funny because I specialize in email marketing. For years I did inbound email marketing, but for the last several years I've been doing cold email outreach, which everyone goes on and on, doesn't work. Well, they're if I can, with all due respect, they're wrong. So but what's interesting about cold outreach, it's like this whole other beast. And you have 150 words, you have 5 seconds. This is probably true actually with a lot of things, beyond cold outreach, but that's what's so interesting about it is you have to be quite technical. You have to be, there's a lot of things that kind of balls that you need to master for it to work. But the strategy and the messaging, there's like zero room for error, which I love, right? So, because it's not about, 5 zillion words. You need to immediately get to the pain point. You have to immediately get to what your unique mechanism is and what you do differently than everyone else. And but still understanding the people's mentalities, if you will, people, what their psychological makeup is. I love it. Because a lot of people think you just copy and paste. You don't have copy and paste doesn't take into account humanity, sadly. It's also why I do Tiny Thunder, right? So I do the metaphoric storytelling, um, because I feel like people are really tired of just being talked to with their left brain. And whilst it's sort of an unconscious, metaphors in general are an unconscious process, I think um uh, people are looking for ways to relate to the messaging that's out there. And
Mhm.
I think it's something that's sadly very ignored by a lot of people. It's not a formula. You have to understand where people are coming from, which is why I love metaphors so much, because they get to that really, it's like a fast track to the unconscious. And it makes it fun, right? It's like it makes it fun and more, yeah. So I use metaphoric storytelling to illustrate all the things that we're talking about: pain points, benefits, features, everything, and it just makes it a much more interesting conversation.
So um, I'll come to the metaphoric storytelling in a moment. I have your book here, which you sent to me.
Yay.
I'm 90 pages in. I'm a bit of a slow
Oh
reader.
yeah, we won't give you a test.
Okay, good. But I wanted to just ask before we get there, because you talked about doing things like, doing these kind of research projects where you're traveling around the world talking to skiers. And I'm thinking, okay, like I can understand if you're working with a global brand, on some level that can be incorporated into a budget for a big campaign. But when you're working with small businesses, there's
You
no
can't,
room
you
for that
can't
kind of
do
stuff at all, right?
Yeah,
It's like just do the thing. They
yeah,
just want you to just do
that's
the
right.
thing.
That you absolutely. And then that's where yeah, I can't, obviously, I'm not traveling around the world for a small client that can barely rub two pennies together. But what I can do is bring all that wealth of knowledge and what I've done to bear to help them. You know, what people don't understand is if they've heard the message before, they're not going to be interested. You have to figure out a way to, and there are universal, we're not all the same, but we do have there are universal experiences
Yes.
and universal, and also that's another reasons why I like the storytelling, because you can tell a personal story and it'll be, like about something that you did, and people will nod their head and say, oh yeah, that happens at our house too, right? That they're universal. um there's a universal human experience that I feel is underutilized when it comes to marketing and communications.
Yes. But people can point and say, hey, that's me.
That's me. Well, that's what the future studies did. Like these men, like I would do the future man, and then like all the men in the garden is like, you just described me. And that's what you want people, because they're leaning into you then. You want people to say, that's me. That's exactly what the point of it is. Whether, I don't care what kind of form of communication it is. You want people to say, oh yeah, I totally get that.
I think there's two things there with social media is that, look, there's been such a massive proliferation of marketing as an industry. It's expanded out from, the kind of world you grew up in was extremely specialist, very highly educated people who really
Yeah.
dedicated their lives to it, to nowadays anyone who's just looking to make make a
Well,
buck.
and but there's a beauty in that, and there's a
Yes.
huge danger in that, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I love the fact that the tools are available to people, and I am quite egalitarian, so I don't like, I'm glad that all the media, the thing, we brought things down to the sort of a personal level now. People
Mhm.
have tools to do, but the problem is, just because you have the tools doesn't necessarily mean you know how to use them. And
Mhm.
that's where, I mean, and I see it every single day, and people kind of assume they can just do marketing because they can go into Facebook and press a few buttons, but but that's not always true.
Yes, I would say it's rarely true. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's where most marketing comes off as being clunky or boring or repetitive. It's copy paste, it's monkey see, monkey do. It's just kind of this kind of very flat-footed on the nose messaging. Whereas the people who are really great, are you still there, Sue?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, good. The you froze for a moment. The people who are
Oh,
really
sorry.
great are either people who are very good storytellers, like good at the idea of like what's the word of almost disarming people's suspicions through story, or they're just kind of savants who can just represent something in how they live their life that other people say, I love it. I want that for myself.
I want that. I want
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Yeah. But it's really easy to kind of get into that gray stream of kind of flat um communications, that it's like, oh my God, I've heard this a million times before. I could just copy and paste it. I don't care what they're talking about. It just sounds like what I've heard before. And that is the problem right now, I think. And the problem is, it ends up turning people off. They turn I talk about it in my book, they turn the off switch. They turn, yeah, they just don't
Yes.
listen.
If it's the same old thing, nobody wants to know. They want something fresh, or at the very least, they want something that invites a sense of curiosity or voyeurism,
Right.
or some. They want to snoop around in other people's business. For me, that's I found to be one of the most powerful marketing appeals. If you can make people feel like they're snooping in somebody else's business, that seems to appeal to almost everybody.
The other thing that people don't get, speaking of snooping into other people's businesses, like the social media thing's kind of a mess, right? So, because I mean, it was really funny. I spoke to someone yesterday, and she had just gone on a holiday and was showing all these unbelievable pictures of the hotel and the beach. And then I got on the phone with her yesterday and she's like, I'm not going to say the destination, but she said it completely sucked. Like there was open sewage. And I'm thinking, that isn't what I saw on your on your social media thing. I saw the exact opposite. So it's like, and people don't get. I think I would have rather had posts about how the open sewage stunk. That would have been interesting to me, right? But people don't get that. They're like, oh, um we need to show the perfection. But what people really want is the perfection of imperfection. They want to relate to you. They can't, no one can relate to perfect. No one.
People feel a strong sense of a need to present themselves in a way to like trim away all the messy and ugly parts of their life on social media. They feel intense social pressure to do that.
But we want messy. Messy is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Clean and perfect isn't interesting. Just think about, I mean, I don't know, maybe I have a bias to this, but when I look at architecture, I'm much more interested in a like the house like I have, which is not perfect. It's old and there's, the there are a lot of imperfections, but there's a soul to it, right? If flat white plaster doesn't give you a soul, right? And
Yes.
I think that's true with people too. We relate to messiness because all of us, I don't care who you are, we all deal with it. We all deal with disappointments, we all deal with rejection, we all deal with feeling invisible, we all feel, all kinds of vulnerabilities, right?
Yes. So coming to your book where you talk um about basically a model for creating marketing messages based on story. I think would
Right.
that be fair to describe it like that?
So yes, with this is kind of a caveat that what I do is I take a story, and I don't want to call it a story because people, when they hear story now, they've all been trained to think hero's journey. We're not talking hero's journey. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about, and imagine you're at a dinner party. Think of that conversation. It's nothing but stories. Did you hear what she said? Did you see that thing here? Did you? And they're like snippets, they're anecdotes, and what I do is I take those anecdotes, whether they're personal or third party stories, and I use them to illustrate all kinds of messages, whether it's a process or a pain point or a dream or a nightmare. And often the story is completely unrelated to the industry that the person is selling their product or service in. And the farther apart, the better, because it's like, why the heck is she telling me the story about Vincent van Gogh? That has nothing to do with whatever, right? And then the fun part is when you bring the two together. It's like, oh, it's almost like telling a joke, right? It's like, oh, I get that now, right? And it's not just, a lot of people talk about storytelling, and what they're talking about is their story, their brand story. And there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with that, by the way, but it's, to me, a brand story that's fine, but it's got a short runway. There's only so many times you want to hear the brand story, right? And it's like, again, back to the dinner party, sitting next to the guy that goes on and he's like in a loop and he talks about himself over and over again. But you're the person everyone's leaning into is the person telling the fun stories about other stuff, right?
Yes.
And so it's like using what's going on around us, like kind of joining the collective dialogue versus interrupting it, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can even, the great thing about the stories that you showed, and you call them metaphoric stories, they're stories
Right.
that are not, like you said, not procedural stories like the hero's journey, and not like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, but the
Right.
little
Right.
little slices of life. The one that stuck out to me from reading your book was the story about Prince Philip, how there was a dinner guest at a party
So
and
sweet.
she had a disability and she couldn't eat with knife and fork. So he chose to, that night, he handed away his knife and fork and he sat beside her and he ate with his fingers to show that he wanted to make her feel comfortable to eat her food at his table. I thought
I
that's
love
perfect. It's a great story.
I love that story. And
Yeah.
so I could have said in the email or the whatever, the social media post or whatever I made, I could say empathy is important, right? I could say that, or I could tell that story, which is a perfect illustration of empathy. Which message would you remember more? You're going to remember for sure the story about Prince Philip, right?
Yes.
And you're going to remember the message about empathy, but what people, by doing that, you're going to be much more memorable. People will not forget your message because I call it, you're wrapping it up in a Tiffany box of a story or of an anecdote. Or it could be something, it could be a surprising fact. It could be, there are many, many sources, a movie scene, a book character, a TED talk. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can wrap these up. And what I like about it, it's a much richer avenue to use stories beyond brand storytelling. Again, I think brand storytelling is always important, but it's limited because there's only so many times you can tell that story, right?
One thing that struck me about your metaphoric stories is that they're another form of the most ancient selling technique, which is demonstration. So, for example, telling a story like that where somebody displays empathy, that's demonstration. And we've all had the experience of meeting somebody who talks about, I'm an empath, or I'm so empathetic, and they tend to end up being somebody who has got zero
and
empathy.
They're like,
They're a monster.
we have a joke here at the house because, as you know, the French are kind of notorious for the working ethic thing is not happening here. So we have people, I've had a million people traipse through this home, like, I can do everything. I'm so honest. And like my daughters and I look at each other and we're like, uh-oh, we got a problem.
We're in trouble.
If you're honest, you don't need to tell me you're honest. But you know what I'm saying? So it's like, yeah. I think that I'd rather someone come in here and show that they're honest, or someone come in here and show that they know how to do things. But they will never be the ones who say they can do that. They just do it, right?
Yes. And I think you may know of Ben Settle, who's talked about this for years,
I
which is
know
if
Ben
you have
Settle,
to
yeah.
say it, you ain't it. And it's just such a
That's
great
right.
principle to go by, that
That's right.
it's so much more powerful when you demonstrate it rather than describe it.
That's exactly right. And so, and yeah, I mean, thank you. I wish I had talked to you before I finished the book. I would have added that in.
Okay.
Edition 2.
In your you've got 3 steps, which again, in all the best marketing traditions of having a simple 3-step process that's easy for people to grasp. Your first step is to find that metaphoric story, and then your second step is to actually be able to make the transition between that and the lesson you're trying to drive home, or the action you want people to take. So how do you do that part?
That part is hard for a lot of people, basically. So if we go back to the selection of the metaphoric story, I think this is important because you have to start with the end in mind, right? So you have to think, what is it that I want? What is it that I want to demonstrate in whatever piece of communication it is? What benefit do I want to show? What dream do I want to illustrate? What pain point or the emotion around a pain point do I want to talk about? And so you have to start with that, and that will help you get to the lesson, if you will. So you figure out what it is, you find a metaphoric story that matches that. And then the lesson's easy in the sense that it's like, basically it's something along the lines of, why am I telling you this story? It's because imagine that we want to talk about lack of time. Lack of time is something that we all, or overwhelm is something that we all deal with. And then the transit and it's something that we all grapple with on a daily basis, which is why I've done my best. Then you do the segue into the whatever you're trying to sell, or you don't have to necessarily sell. It could be, that's why I'd like you to watch this video, because it's going to give you 3 steps of how to manage overwhelm on a daily basis. Or this is why I'd love you to take a look at our service, which does X, right? So it ends up feeling really natural. But you have people nodding. If the story is good enough, you have people nodding their heads saying, oh yeah, because you're doing what, by the way, back to Ben Settle, what he always says to do. You need to have a mix of entertainment, if it's just flat selling or flat information, it just, it's like a dull pebble on the pond. It doesn't skip. People don't gravitate towards it. So it's a, I'm surprised people don't talk about it more, but it's a huge persuasive device. Because how could you not? Because it just kind of, a story lulls you, it's a Trojan horse, it lulls you in. I mean,
To a
it's
f-
not, it doesn't feel manipulative, but that's what it does.
yes. I mean, I can't remember. I can remember the ad. I can't quite remember who it's for, but there's that ad of it's of the old man who is very frail, and he's spending months and months and months in preparation, lifting weights, in his room, and it's unclear why. And then in the final few seconds, you see it's Christmas, and he's meeting up with his grandchildren. And he wants to be able to pick up his granddaughter so she can put the star on the
It's so
Christmas
sweet.
tree.
I don't know this ad, but it's so sweet.
I can't remember what the product is for. I've forgotten the product. I've forgotten everything, but that's but
I don't
again,
think that's the point, but we would like
yeah.
the product to be related to
I'm hoping that they got the last bit right, but I remember that ad, and there's no
it.
words in it. It's just a visual story of this old guy working out in his room, lifting weights, and the neighbors are kind of curious. What the hell is this crazy old guy doing? And then the payoff is in the last few seconds where he meets up
That's
with the family,
sweet.
picks up the little girl, and he puts her up to the tree so she can put the star on top of the tree. And this is a beautiful illustration of this kind of story, exactly.
Yeah, it's really sweet.
For you, when you're doing this kind of work, you must be going around collecting bits of information and bits of stories all the time. Are you always like gathering wool together, thinking I can use that later?
So that's a great question, because this is sort of, so I've been doing this for years. So I have like this huge story library, thousands of stories that are, some are raw, some are written, a lot of them are written. Because I've, for many, many years, I don't do it anymore, but for many years I did customized copywriting for people.
Mm-hmm.
And um, so, but what I've done now, which is kind of exciting, I'm in the process of doing. So one of the things that I've realized with Tiny Thunder and metaphoric storytelling is that people love it and they have a hard time doing it. It's just because it's not a formula. It's actually not a formula, right? So that it's, I could talk about the 3 steps, but you still have to figure out what you want to say and find the story that illustrates it. And a lot of people struggle with that. And then you have to write it, right? So I have been working with some developers. We're creating an app that allows, that will basically bring in both stories from my library as well as stories from around the world, right? Whether it's, about nature, whether it's about books, whatever. And it actually writes the metaphoric story for you. And it's been quite a journey, because it's, we're using AI and it's hard to, but it's actually, so we've been struggling because I don't like a lot of the AI results, but we've trained it so that the stories are actually really quite good,
Oh,
like kind
excellent.
of crazy good. Yeah. So yeah, so that's kind of a big thing that I'll probably hopefully be rolling out in the autumn, in the fourth quarter. But
And
and so allowing people to, and then, I'll give people choice. I'll give them, like, there'll be a lot of choice, so lots of different sources. And would you like this story? Would you like that story? And then we'll help them write it so that they don't even have to, and obviously they can tweak it afterwards. But it's kind of a next level from what a lot of the AI copy that one sees.
yes,
But
which
we've been working on it for a really long time to get it, because yeah. So yeah, I'm really excited about that, so that people can use it. You can use it in so many different ways. You can use it for emails, for social media posts, you can use it for sales pitches, you can use it, there's just a whole host of ways that they can use the metaphoric storytelling. It's because it's a great tool of persuasion. I mean, it's authentic. It doesn't feel um manipulative, if you will.
yes, and a simple story like that can be a natural hook. I mean, I uh I have a friend who has a business, and their origin story, when you ask them how did you come up with the idea for it, their story is, well, we didn't actually. We overheard it at a dinner party. And
Yeah.
so their origin story is that one of the partners was at a dinner party and he heard someone talking about a problem that they were having in their business. And he thought, oh, I can do something about that. So he went home from the party that night. He wrote down what he remembered that they had been talking about in the conversation. He called up his friend. He said, I've got this idea. Can we try it out? And now, obviously, a hundred other things had to happen before they got to that, to a business that's viable. But that little kernel of that story is kind of now
I
their
love
sort of
that.
origin
It's
myth.
great. It's great. It's great. Yeah. I think that yeah, I'm really excited about sort of the uh, I mean, to me, I get really disappointed with a lot of the messaging that I see on a daily basis. And I feel
Mhm.
like it'd be great if we could raise the bar a bit in terms of how we speak to each other and just make it more interesting and more entertaining. It's not just about selling, it's also just about being more authentic and more human and more genuine and more just overall more entertaining and interesting.
Yes, I think it can be a problem in the sort of field of marketing and copywriting that people can become very, they can become too pragmatic, where
Yes.
it's all about like, if it converts, we'll run it.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you end up getting these weird, like torturous kind of headlines, and then extremely manipulative copy that like leaves people feeling like trash after they've read it, but they've spent a bunch of money and now they have buyer's remorse. And that seems to be a way like a lot of things go, especially on the more direct response side. And that
Yeah.
you come into the industry and you think, okay, this is how things are done. Okay, I'll learn how to do it. And then I just, after a couple of years, I just felt so dirty all the time. I was just like, I don't want to do
Yeah, and
this.
what people don't understand either, first of all, um, everyone, a lot of people get mad at me when I say this, but direct response is not the only way to market.
Mhm.
Let's just put that
Yes,
first.
that's
But
true.
second of all, there are a lot of wonderful direct response principles which I use daily, but that they don't, there's a way of doing it that you don't have to, there's a spectrum, right? So there's a way of using the direct response principles, which are sound, and dressing it up. That's what Tiny Thunder does. It dresses it up.
Mhm.
And I don't think that, I'm not sure why people don't, because it's not a nice feeling doing that that type of communications all the time. It's why
Mhm.
by the way, it's why I invented Tiny Thunder, because I couldn't stand it. Like, and also, even if you're not using, even if you're not being sort of really heavy-handed and manipulative, it's boring. Are you feeling frustrated about X? Well, we can do this for you. It's like no one cares. Like, yeah, but there's a million emails going out as we speak which say that this is what we do for you. Bullet point 1, 2, and 3. Sign up here. And just there's a way of, you can impart that information, but wrap it up so that it is much more interesting.
Yes. I mean, look, being a marketer, inevitably I've signed up to hundreds of mailing lists, and I just have this sense of dread every time I open my email because there's just so many bloody emails. I'm like, I really need to unsubscribe from all these. I really need to clean out my inbox and delete them all. But for now, I don't need to do that right this second because I've got a lot of other shit I need to do today. So I'm just going to ignore it all. And it's just like the sea of crap. And there's occasionally there's a name of somebody I recognize who I think, I know that person writes a good email. Just check out what they've got to say. And inevitably, there are people who are just sharing some more personal experiences, and
Yeah.
where you feel like you've developed some kind of a real uh,
Yeah,
affinity
you
for that
feel,
person.
yeah. Yeah, it's funny. The email, there are very few that in my opinion, email lists that stand out. Because it's just a lot of just over and over again. And yeah, the metrics work. They
They do.
do, but that doesn't, they absolutely work. But that doesn't mean you're building a relationship with people.
again, I think it's to do with sort of maybe the biz opification in the recent years of like copywriting direct response, that like people will just say, okay, whatever works, if it gets money today, I'll do it, which is fine. And people can make a bit of money that way. But then also as well, like customers don't stick around once they feel like they're being disrespected or they're being abused or manipulated. And sooner or later, most people get wise to it.
You end up burning out your list.
Yeah. Or you end up having just like the only customers who stick around are just the crappiest, worst customers you'd never want to have anyway. And anyone who could be a good customer and would be probably, if you gave them a decent solution, would gladly stay with you for years. They're long gone because they feel disrespected.
Yeah, and yeah. I mean, there are a lot of, I mean, this is like a whole other conversation, but yeah, I think that, and there's a lot of like, a lot of people, for example, there's a lot of sort of myths out there that people believe in. Like, for example, I've always been interested in cold outreach and I do a lot of it. And
Mm-hmm.
I help people build their businesses doing that. It's, they get like $500,000 deals in their first meeting, like it's really, really powerful. And yet there's this whole myth out there that it doesn't work and that you have to, invite people in through Facebook ads to $97 X. You don't. It's very funny to me that people, I think that, and there's a merit in each method,
Mm-hmm.
but I think also people need to be open to the fact that there are other methods they might not use that also are quite powerful and work.
Mm-hmm. What I've seen with cold outreach is that it's extremely powerful if it's done with
It's
like really
really
tight
hard to do it
targeting.
right. It's
Very hard to do
really
right.
hard to do it right. Like 99.9% of cold, which is why it has a bad name, because it's, you get these stupid emails. But if it's done right, when I send out a campaign, I literally get 8 meetings a day. It's so powerful. I have to stop.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, because I can't. I mean, I'm working on it, but I don't have a system that can accommodate all the people that want to work with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like a great problem to have.
That is a good problem to have. I think the thing with cold outreach and cold email in particular is that if you've got a very highly targeted message for a very specific type of person and there's a lot of
There you go.
personalization at a
There
small
you
scale,
go.
it's brilliant. The problem becomes when people try to abuse it and make it do things it was never meant to do. Or, oh, we want to send 10,000 cold emails today. Well, you're going to
No.
send garbage. Why not send 10 cold emails today and make each one fantastic?
Or max 200, right? And then,
Yeah.
I mean, I- I've seen absolute miracles happen with it, but you have to be strategic. You have to, you have to be incredibly discerning about your copy and your messaging and the database that you're using. It's not about I know people who like send 70,000 emails out in a day and they're like boasting. It's like, no, that suggests to me that you're not being strategic,
Yes. You don't know who
right?
you're talking to or what you want to say.
It's like, let's just throw the confetti out. But the good thing is, for people that do know how to do it, people gravitate towards you, right?
Yes.
Because, in it, but yeah, but there are a lot of different ways out there of getting to people. There's a lot of different, there's not just one way. And I think sometimes people forget that.
You talked several times today during our conversation about strategic thinking in an industry which is sort of oftentimes tends to focus on the tactical and what's working now. How can people actually take a step back from what they're doing in the day to day and become more strategic in their
Ah,
actions?
gosh, what a great question. And I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I think that, um, I would just encourage people to, because everything's become digital and you can, um, it's, if I could say something, this is related, this is a little bit of a cul-de-sac, but when I was at the Ogilvy and Mathers and the BBDOs of the world, we kind of felt sorry for direct response people.
Mhm.
Right? So it's great, so like the internet came and because everything can be so finely tuned and all the metrics we've gone the complete other side. And I feel like there's probably the answer somewhere in the middle, right? But what people don't understand is sometimes taking a step back and being strategic and thinking about, you know what, people don't do? Calling up 10, 20, 30 people who are your ideal prospects and just talking to them. I'm actually thinking about offering this as a service for you all, because people don't do that. They guess. And then you say to them, you have the rolling eyes of, oh yeah, this is what my prospect thinks. Like I know that. Well, do you really know that? Do you really know what people are thinking and the real reason that whatever it is important to them? And probably the answer is maybe we don't know, right? So what in people don't take time to say, hey, I'm doing this service or product or whatever. I'd like to just pick your brains. No one takes the time. That would be a great strategic thing to do. That's what I used to do with these future studies. We'd talk to people. We'd go and we do, I wouldn't do focus groups because I don't believe in the focus groups, but I would literally I did a gig with Nike, and we went all around Europe, and we literally were doing tug of war and playing soccer and doing all this stuff, and and being with instead of putting them in normally the focus groups, you have a glass wall.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, no glass wall. We're going to sit in a living room and chat with these people. We're going to go play football. And that's what we did. And it was huge. Talking to people is a great way to become more strategic about what your business is, and doing it in a disciplined way, right? So where you're really listening. And so they're not having to fit into your world, but you're trying to figure out what their world's about.
Yes.
And you always get a really good insights doing that, but people don't take the time. They're like, oh yeah, I already know who my prospect is. I know who they're and it's like, no, are you sure?
For copywriters and freelancers especially, this can be really frustrating because a lot of them, I think, want to do it, and maybe they are not allowed to do it because the client doesn't want to let them speak to the customer, or the client won't give them access to the recordings of the sales calls or the other place where they can really get that primary information directly from the person
Yeah.
who's buying the thing. Everything's mediated through the client's wishes. I mean, I find that even my own clients, I'm always asking them, what do your customers say to you? Or, what kinds of things are happening in your customer's life before they pick up the phone and decide they want to work with you or spend money with you? And while they do have insights to share, a lot of times the answer is, oh, I don't really know. Nobody's ever asked. I never really thought about that before. And it's like, I get it, they're so deep inside their business, they probably don't realize that it's very important. But those little insights can make all the difference in being able to get your customers' attention and communicate with them effectively.
Yeah. I mean, that one exercise, I would, and even if it's not their actual clients, talk to someone that's like their actual clients and say, this is what we're doing, and what would you think about this? It doesn't have to be even specific, but you can just kind of describe without even giving the client's name. But I've often toyed around with the idea of creating a subdivision in my company about doing that, because if there's a missing link, it's that one. And I see it across, because I deal with um I deal with all kinds of companies, people in Silicon Valley. I deal with, physical security. I deal with really high tech companies, and they all don't have that. They all don't have a full understanding of what makes their ideal prospect tick, and what it, and I think people are leaving a lot of money on the table not understanding that.
Mhm. I think if we've got a few more minutes left, maybe that will be just a great thing to talk about. Last will be about your business, Sue, because you've talked about kind of, your career and where you're at now, and then you no longer write copy for people, but you still have a business, an agency type business. So what is it that your business does now? What's the core of what you can deliver for your clients?
So I have the cold outreach service, which is my biggest service. I do have a couple kind of what I would call elite clients who have me do their copy, but they're kind of more friends of the family. I call them my friends and family, people that I've
Mhm.
worked, clients that I've worked with for many, many years. And then I have the Tiny Thunder, the Tiny Thunder. I also have the Tiny Thunder app, which I'm developing, which is going to be big,
Awesome.
that people will be able to use. So yeah, so that's basically what's going on. I do, and I think I will probably create an online course on email in general. So email, both outreach and the inbound. Because I do feel like people, there's kind of a lot of old like formulas floating around that I think might need to be dusted off.
When you say inbound email, do you mean like newsletter type email for people that
Yeah, that's what I'm
subscribe?
talking about. So like if you have a list and you're emailing your list basically. And I feel like some of the practices that people are following, because I've done a ton of work in that area. I think maybe people need to kind of relook and rehash some of the things that they're doing because it's not that effective for a lot of people. And some people don't do it at all.
Yeah.
So
Even
there's
bad email is better than no email. And there's a
yeah,
lot of
that's
clients who are
right.
like, oh
It's
yeah,
like
I've got 20,000 emails and I don't do anything with them. I just send them the
like
receipt and that's it.
yeah, so I think, and then there's the really unsexy topic that people no one wants to talk about, but super important, which is email deliverability. And there's a whole host of things that people are doing wrong, and it's super, super easy to get that's kind of tidied up so that because all the sending all the emails out in the world that end up in spam are hopeless. What you might as well just not start.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's basically um but I would say probably at least 60% of my agency does the cold outreach because it's a huge it's huge demand.
Okay. When you are talking about it, it does sound to me though that you're not doing that for like a mass scale thing. This is looking to find, it's more like being a sniper, right? You're trying to find a very specific type of person for a very
Exactly.
specific type of person.
So I use a really fabulous um piece of software. It's like light years ahead of anything out there. It's called Ample Market. So I actually right before this call, I was on a call with them.
Hmm.
They're real. I don't work for them. I actually am one of their clients, but I use that. What the way I like to say, the way I like to describe it, it's sort of like the best of tech with the best of messaging. And a lot of people they think it's just about succeeding is just about getting a tool. It's not just the tool. The tool needs to be fed properly, if
Hmm.
you will. So yeah, so I basically I do have a done for you service. I do everything for people.
What
I
kinds of
do
businesses
everything. Oh
can
my
actually get value
gosh.
from working with you on that type of work on
Oh,
cold
so
outreach?
everyone. I have consultants. I have people that are in like sell uh, they help people create cosmetics. I do physical security. I have a client that sells Kubernetes software. I mean,
Hmm.
it's so, a lot of people and they, specialize, but the way I see it, because so much of it is strategic, because you need to understand what audience needs what messaging, is that the way I always say it, I describe it to people is like, I played the chess game a lot.
Hmm.
So I know and so the industries I work in, the better, to be honest with you. I do a lot of work in, this is a sentence I never thought I'd say. I do, I do a lot of work in life sciences. I do
Okay.
work with medical instruments, all that, and get really great results for people. A lot of international clients. Most, I would say 70% are American, but I have at least 30% are European.
Those are very specialized types of people, like the life science industry or things like Kubernetes, which is a type of it's a type of software for doing back end. So what's the word? Like building technical infrastructure for
Yeah,
corporations.
that's right. It's
You,
real high level, like it's like a whole other language.
you're not going to capture or touch those people with a Facebook ad. Let's put it like that. At least
Well,
not in a
that's
professional
that's what's
setting.
kind of interesting. That's what's interesting about it. And that some of the things I sometimes I'll a client will hire me and I have a question in my mind whether or not it work, but so many like things that work like the I had a client he that did background, he sold background music for like hospitality units. And I'm like, I was kind of like, I don't know if this is going to work. And he got meeting after meeting after meeting. So yeah, so a lot of different, and a lot of Silicon Valley, people that are doing software, tech, um, yeah. And that, but interesting enough that a lot of software, offers, it's hard to find the point of differentiation. It's a challenge.
Mhm.
So yeah.
When
And
you
then
were,
there's so
oh,
yeah, but it's really fun. It's like for someone who's a strategist like me, you have no idea. It's like I'm like playing chess all day long. It's really fun. So it's like kind of bringing together my strategic side, my copy side, the tech side. So it's kind of a really fun intersection. Um, and I just love doing what I do.
do you find your people or do your people find you?
So a little bit of both. It's people, a lot of people, there's a lot of word of mouth, so people will, but I do outreaches. I do cold outreaches for myself.
Okay, that's the best, right? Because it's kind of eating your own dog food. It's like it worked
It's
on you, it's
well,
going to work for you.
well, like people will get on the phone and they're like, "Does it work?" I said, "Well, we're talking, aren't we?"
Yeah.
It's total show and tell.
It's
It's
mousetrap
brilliant when you can
logic.
do that. Yeah,
It's
exactly. So like I got you. So um but and I would say 80% of the time it works, and then there's 20% it just doesn't work, and a lot of it has to do with the offer. So or the audience is difficult, but it's not like a lot of people see it as like a traffic source. It's a different way of marketing. So it's like you can't transport a Facebook ad funnel and just yeah, so imagine you have a Facebook ad funnel and you have a webinar or whatever that
Mhm.
people watch. You can't just transplant that into a cold outreach and just send people to it's just just a different way of marketing. And I like the fact that there's so many different businesses. It's not just coaching and consulting, right?
Yes, which gets it gets old. In fact, it got old some time ago. And I've personally have moved away from that because for exactly that reason, it got tired. And I tend to work with now like blue collar and construction type businesses more these days
Yeah.
and
I
enjoy
love
it
that.
much more as a
Yeah.
result.
I love the different people too, right? It's fun.
Yeah, people
Yeah.
who are not just stuck behind a computer 12 hours a day, but are out doing different things in the world in weird and wonderful places and doing
And
different stuff.
and the great thing is I could do all this. I like from here. Like I'm in my farmhouse in Burgundy. That's pretty great, right?
My last question for you is you mentioned about how your services they tend to be most effective when they don't work, it's always the offer. When someone is talking to you, what's the kind of things that give you then like make your ears stand up and think, oh, that's a good offer. I know people will want that.
When it's unique, when there's a unique, forget the USB, when there's a unique mechanism. So like there's nothing. So I think that they need to be doing something that's slightly different than what everyone else is doing. And when they don't, it's an uphill battle because I don't want to, give any specific examples, but I've had a few clients who in very surprising industries, because you would have thought they would be like in agencies, right? For example, who cannot differentiate themselves. They're offering what everyone else is offering, and there's no real sharp edge that people can kind of something that they can put their hat on and really and it's an uphill battle. It really is. So there has to be something, and it could be in the service, it could be how they came to do the service. There could be a lot of different ways that you could talk about that unique mechanism. But because I know I sell my service really, really easily, and everyone and their brother, you just open your emails trying to sell cold email outreach, right? But I sell it and it's expensive. My service is not cheap. And and but it's just the way that the way I'm presenting it, I guess, is slightly different. So it's like and I think people, the two things that you've asked me about, the the strategic side of what the prospects are thinking and the presentation of it are the two things that people don't spend enough time on. And when you get that right, you have it's a lever that you can it really, really works because people really resonate with it.
Perfect. Sue, I think that is a great note to wrap this conversation on. Thank you for coming
Thanks.
today.
Thank you for your time.
Your book is called Tiny Thunder. It's available on Amazon. You sent it to me as a gift. Thank you very much, but I know it is available on Amazon. And yeah, where else can people find you if they want to know more or reach out to you?
They can reach out to me. They can go if they want Tiny Thunder, they can go to SueRice.com/Tiny Thunder. They can reach out to me on Facebook. I'd love to. I'm a chatterbox. I love meeting people. So, reach out to me on Facebook. That's probably where I am. And LinkedIn, of course, too.
Great. I'll put all those in the video description when we publish on YouTube. Thank you once again.
Thanks.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.